Okay, so Victor, great to have you back on the show. And we're definitely, and when I say definitely, I'm talking about definitely in need of the Gen Z perspective right now. So let's jump into it. Gen Z alone could change the tide of the 2024 election. There are so many of you. There's so many of you that are potential voters. But my question to you is, will they vote or will they stay home? I guess the better question is, will they vote for President Biden over, say, a potential President Donald Trump?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for having me back on, Michael. It's great to see you this morning. I would say a couple of things. So first of all, there are a lot of polls and headlines out there right now showing that Biden is really losing the youth vote and that young people are voting or preferring Donald Trump over Joe Biden. That's simply just not the case. And I think it's important when we're all consuming the news to be aware of sort of how those polls are conducted, because most of those polls that are being released and they're through the method of phone calling only. And if you have someone young in your life, you probably know that it's very hard to get them to pick up the phone. So to get them to pick up a phone from a random number is very challenging and very, I think, not representative of most of Gen Zers. The Gen Zers who I talk to are generally unaware of what President Biden has accomplished. And there are a lot of things that he's accomplished, and we can get through them in this episode, but it's been pretty remarkable. I would say this president has probably been the most pro-youth president in at least my lifetime, but probably in modern American history. But the thing is that young people don't really know about those accomplishments. They don't feel it. And that's going to be, I think, part of the challenge for President Biden as he heads into re-election, because unlike 2020, I think what's going to be really important in this election is giving young people not just something to vote against, right? Most young people who I talk about are very against Trump. They don't like any of the policies he stands for. But what they care more about, I think, this time around is something to believe in and something to vote for. And I think that's going to be the challenge that President Biden and his campaign is going to come up against, is how do we reach young voters where they are? How do we get those facts across in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's authentic? And I think that's going to be, over the next 10 months, the biggest challenge when reaching Gen Zers. But I think if they can do that, young people will overwhelmingly vote for Biden, just like we did in 2020, and then we turned out again in 2022 and in elections this last year in 2023.
Okay, so which policies, for example, do Gen Zers not like that Trump is espousing?
I would say probably everyone that I can think of. I mean, when you think of just basic core values, just his character, it's not really kind of appealing to see someone who is openly racist, someone who's been found by a court to be a sexual abuser, someone who openly spreads homophobia, bigotry. I'm Asian American. I know my community felt very, very betrayed when he called COVID-19 the Kung flu, and he kept on referring it to the China virus and really scapegoated Chinese people. So I think a lot of the issues that he just, as a basic character, really runs against a lot of the things that Gen Z cares about, and most Americans, I would say, for that matter. But when it comes to policy too, you think of his immigration policies. I can't think of anyone who endorses family separation. I can't think of anyone who wants our government to be taken over by these far right extremists who don't know anything about governing. And I think most of Gen Zers just want someone who would represent our life. And I think during his time, and we saw this in 2018 when young people really turned out for the first time in droves and voted for a Democratic Congress and really resulted in this blue wave. I think most people were just fed up with Donald Trump, his character, his policies. But I think the top one is probably just like viscerally, when you see him, he just stands against everything we care about, just as a kind of a moral and decent person.
I mean, but when was the last time that you were in a truly red state? Because these people hate immigrants, which is funny that Vivek Ramaswamy thought he even had a shot, right? I mean, they hate immigrants. The first thing Donald said he's going to do, after, of course, rewriting the Constitution, after dismantling, our tripartite system of government, after he stops the Ukraine-Russia war, after he resolves Israel-Hamas, then he's going to do the greatest, largest, most, expansive migrant deportation and roundup that this country has ever seen. What's the position, for example, on your college campus? Because I'm with you on that. I can't understand how any Gen Zer, and there are Gen Zers that are pro-Trump, how could any Gen Zer, especially female Gen Zers, be interested in voting for somebody who touts as an accomplishment the fact that he himself is responsible for the overturning of Roe versus Wade? How?
It's hard to fathom for me as well, but I would say that group of Gen Zers, and when you look at I think it's important to understand sort of Gen Z as a whole. It's the most diverse generation in America, racially, socioeconomically, just on basically every metric, it's the most diverse. But when you look at the people who support Trump the most, they tend to be whiter, they tend to be from the South, as you say, they tend to be overly religious, which is something that most Gen Zers actually don't identify with a particular religion. So I think when you look at that demographic, they tend to come from places where Republicans have traditionally succeeded, places like Florida and Texas, and they've managed to sort of tap into that fear, I think, of a lot of Gen Zers, and that's the white national sphere of these minorities taking over. And I think some of them have bought into that. Some of them have bought into that narrative of black people and these growing demographics taking over white people. But it's very few and far between. I think I don't think there are many of them. And even the people who do support Trump, when you look at Iowa caucus, for instance, Trump got 51% of the total vote, but he only got 21% of the Gen Z vote, which is, I think, telling. And I think that's the lowest he's ever gotten from that demographic. So I think most people are sort of fed up. Yes, there are some who believe in the ideology he espouses, which to me, like you said, is just mind-boggling on all levels. But there aren't many of them. I think most Gen Zers are pragmatic. Most of us agree that we don't want abortion, that something that we grew up with, to be outlawed and banned. We don't want immigration, people to be separated at the border and for people to be mass deported to other countries. I think most of us agree on these very pragmatic issues and just want someone who's going to take action on them.
I mean, let's not forget about climate change as an issue as well. Donald Trump is a climate change denier, plain and simple. I mean, the same way that he denied the existence of COVID, he denies climate change. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, not a Gen Zer. And I said to him, explain to me something. If you don't like New York because of the extremely high taxes, you could always pick yourself up like so many billionaires have and, decamillionaires have, and move to Florida or move to another state that has a lower tax rate.
Yeah.
But you know where you can never leave? You can't leave the earth. So why in the world would you be pro-fracking? And I'm not opposed to fracking, but it has to be intelligent fracking, not just a free-for-all, which is what Donald Trump wanted. There should be no prohibitions on anything. Everything should be as you want to do. If you want to, pollute the air, pollute the air. You can't leave the planet. I don't care how many people want to send rocket ships up into space. You're not leaving this planet. So why shit the planet up for the next generation, the Gen Z generation? And I know a lot of young people. Look, I have a daughter, who's part of that, and a son who's part of that Gen Z, community. And they're really concerned about drinking water, the air that we breathe, the toxicity that exists in our food as a result of fertilizers. I mean, I can't tell you. It's like, oh my God, you bought that? It doesn't say, non-GMO on it. It's sweetie, I couldn't find the fucking non-GMO. Well, throw it in the garbage. It's, because that's what it is. It's garbage. So, Gen Zers are smart, but what we need to do is to make sure that we activate them.
Yes.
That's the concern that I have. And I still, even to this day, cannot understand how Donald even achieved 21% of Gen Zers. Makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and climate change is such an important issue, but I think what's going to be most important in this election is to really just emphasize the choice that faces young people. A lot of them, they might not be paying attention right now. They might not know of what President Biden has accomplished. They might not even understand the threat that Donald Trump poses in this next election. But at every step along the way, I think we have to emphasize this isn't an election that's going to be a referendum. It's an election that's going to be about a choice between two people who couldn't be more different from each other. And like you said, the fact that we even have candidates running for office who deny basic facts like climate change is happening, we're all living in this planet. We're all experiencing higher temperatures. We're all experiencing worsening natural disasters, but somehow you have the right exploiting this issue. I don't know for what reason, but they're exploiting this issue for politics. And I think it's just really putting all of us in danger. But young people, like you said, they're smart. I think they're aware of the reality that is facing us, and they aren't buying into those narratives for the most part. They aren't seeing, what Republicans are espousing and believing it for the most part. And so I think the challenge, though, is to get, like you said, to activate them, to mobilize them, to get them excited to vote, to get them angry at the other side to turn out in 2024, because that's is what's going to keep the far right from ever holding office again.
So then what do you think, Victor, is the biggest issue for young voters right now? Are they worried about democracy? Because I can assure you, my generation is very concerned about democracy versus autocracy. Or maybe it's gun safety. My real question to you, using all of these various different issues, what's going to get you to the polls in droves? What's going to be that issue that's going to drive Gen Zers to the poll in massive, massive number?
So I don't know if I could pinpoint one exact issue, but I think there are a couple of issues right now that are most salient for a lot of Gen Zers. And I'm talking sort of broad strokes. And when you ask Gen Zers sort of what values do you care most about, whether you're Republican or whether you identify as a Republican or whether you identify as a Democrat, most Gen Zers agree on these basic issues. I think the first one is reproductive rights. And we talked about this a little bit before, but after Roe fell, I can't tell you the number of people who I saw on my Instagram stories, on my, just social media networks who posted infographics about the threat and sort of our reality and how scary and dangerous that moment was. And you saw that in 2022 with the midterm election, the number one factor that got young people out there to vote was abortion rights. You looked at states like Michigan, where the lines were out until 2 a.m. in the morning because young people were so scared of what would happen if a Republican took over the state. And so I think that's a really big issue for young people heading into election. We're seeing the campaign releasing ads about Roe and about abortion rights, and they're doing some big abortion rights events in the next couple of weeks. So I think that's going to be a really important issue. The second issue that is affecting basically every Gen Zer, no matter where you're coming from, is gun violence. You look at what's happening in Republican states like Texas. There was just this damning report in Uvalde, but if it could happen in Uvalde, it can happen pretty much anywhere. I'm from Illinois, and there was one that happened right on 4th of July in Highland Park. So no matter where you're from, this is a generation that's had to go through school lockdown drills, and that's scary. And most young people don't want that to be a reality. Most people want to just be able to go to classroom and learn and go to the places they want to go to without having to fear whether they'll be the next victims of gun violence. So I think that's going to be a really important issue too. And probably lastly, I think right now, climate change is the last one, at least domestically, and we can get to some of the foreign policy stuff that is animating, I think, my generation, but at least domestically, I think climate change is the last one, because again, all of us, no matter where we're from, I think anyone can see the impacts of climate change on our reality right now.
And it's affecting jobs, it's affecting life, it's affecting where you're going to end up living. But, just staying on gun safety, it is such a big issue. I remember as a kid, I remember the alarm would go off. First of all, everybody was fucking psyched about it. The alarm would go off. That meant that you got out of class. You would pray during the middle of an exam that the alarm would go off so you could start comparing answers to your friends as you're walking by. I don't care if the teacher said, there's no talking, no talking. It's very different today. When that bell goes off, they're not lining up, Michael's the door monitor. I open the door, wait for everybody. I'm the last guy out. Great. That's not what they're doing now. Now the drill is you bolt the door with either a chair or a bookcase. You block that door and you turn over the desks and you make a fort in case that they start shooting, right? That it's not an open target for the shooter. That's fucked up for a kid to go to school. Again, we enjoyed when the fire alarm went off because nobody was that concerned. You're going to get out. You're going to be fine. Now, when that thing goes off, everybody's anxiety level goes from 0 to 100 in an instant because it's a reminder of what happened at Parkland, what happened at Uvalde, what happened in Highland Park. I mean, and in so many other places. Mm-hmm. It's a ugly reminder of what can happen on any given Tuesday of any given week in any school, anywhere. Yeah. And that's scary shit. And these children, these young children should not have to go to school with this fear. There's enough pressure on kids today. This is not a pressure that they need.
No, it's not a pressure we need. And there's also, I mean, talking about the things that people have had to resort to prevent something like this from happening. There was this video that went viral of a teacher. They're building these like mechanisms in classroom now where it's sort of a wall built into a wall, and they pull out the wall and it becomes a little fortress for the kids. And it's a bulletproof wall. But when there's a lockdown drill or when there's a shooter event at a school, they pull open the wall and then all the kids hide into there. But it's something that, teachers are being trained on how to open the wall, and that's something that teachers shouldn't have to go through either. Why are we forcing teachers? Why are we forcing students to live in this reality? And I think it's because you have Republicans right now who just simply refuse to act. I mean, they have the majority in Congress. They could act on any given day on this issue and pass meaningful common sense gun legislation, but they refuse to do so. And this is, you can talk about the great things that are happening in Illinois or California or any other blue state on gun violence, but their next door red neighbor doesn't have any gun restrictions or gun violence measures. And so that's what's going to make it even worse, because you have people who can just cross state borders, and that only increases the threat of gun violence. So I think, it has to be something that Congress needs to act on. I don't think they will, because they've just been bought by the NRA so heavily at this point, but it's another reminder for, I think, all of us when we head into 2024. Every single House member will be up for re-election. And if you're sick and tired of this reality, you have to go out there and vote for people who actually care about your life, who care about, your children's life. And it's clearly not Republicans right now. And we have to change that. Otherwise, we're just going to keep on having this conversation over and over and over again. And I don't think anyone wants to have that anymore.
I mean, you listen to the NRA. The NRA's position is arm everyone. Every teacher should have a firearm in their classroom. Could you imagine the level of stupidity in a comment like that? We should be now arming students. We should be arming teachers in classrooms. First of all, that just because you arm somebody doesn't mean they know how to use the weapon.
Right.
And just because you go to a range doesn't mean that you're proficient at it either. There's a big difference in going to the target range. Even if you hit the bullseye 7 out of 10 times, that's fantastic. Now do it under a pressure situation.
Right.
Do it when the guy or a girl is there with an AR-15.
Yeah.
Certainly, I hope that they weren't trying to imply that teachers should have AR-15s attached to the wall. But just imagine that there's somebody, a young person walking down the hall looking to do damage, carrying an AR-15, and you have a 9mm, a 45 caliber, whatever it might be. Are you really going to open the door and get into a gunfight? What about the collateral damage that could cause?
Yeah.
Could you imagine? And the level of stupidity or ignorance or arrogance by the NRA is fucking boundless. And I really do hope that Gen Zers see it. It's the same stupidity and ignorance and arrogance that you get from climate deniers. Everybody's talking about, and I just ran down to Florida. There's no state, there's no city tax like we have here in New York. I'm saving myself a fortune. Yeah. Interesting, because the way that they get you back is they hit you with this 2% as the real estate tax based on the value of the purchase on your home. On top of that, insurance, flood, water, wind is nearly now impossible to get, especially if you live by the water or in a flood zone. I mean, Florida is not as cheap to live as many people think.
Yeah.
But all of these issues, and they're just a few We could probably spend the next 50 minutes, the next rest of the show, talking about the various different issues and never really get to an answer other than we need Gen Z. And the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, needs it desperately. So I do know, Victor, that the Biden campaign has launched something called Students for Biden, obviously trying to mobilize Gen Z.
Right.
So my question to you is, has Biden's student loan forgiveness program made any impression on younger voters? Do you think it's making any difference at all?
I think it's making a difference, and at the time that we're recording this, there are new 74,000 people have gotten their student loans forgiven, which brings, I think, the total up to like 3.7 million people total who have gotten their student loans forgiven, which is a pretty remarkable number when you think about it. But I think, again, sort of the biggest challenge that I'm facing is, for the people who are sort of feeling that policy, or for the people who are directly being benefited from student loans, that's different from most Gen Zers. And I think a lot of Gen Zers still don't understand that reality and still haven't really felt or heard that policy. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for this campaign, is sort of how do we get that news? How do we get the great news of student loan forgiveness for so many people out to Gen Zers who care about this issue so much? And I think it's a mix of going on the places where Gen Zers are, whether it's in person, going to colleges and touting these programs, or going on social media and really going on innovative social media platforms, not just Facebook or Twitter, but things like TikTok and Instagram and streaming platforms like Twitch and other platforms where young voters are really concentrated, where young voters consume their information more than on those platforms more than older generations.
So are you telling me, Victor, are you telling me, as an example, that on TikTok, on Twitch, on Instagram, that Joe Biden's accomplishments are not being touted regularly? Because I know that I'm on TikTok. I have close to, 250,000 followers or something like that. And I know that I talk about this shit on a regular basis. I know I do it on Instagram. I know Lincoln Project. I know MeidasTouch Network does it all the time on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook or X or Threads, or, all those social media platforms. Where is this Biden campaign that's really designed to missile seek Gen Zers? What are they missing? What can we do in order to educate young people? Because you're not wrong about this, and it upset me a lot. I was in Florida visiting my parents last week, and we were sitting with some friends, in their community, and their grandson was there. Very bright boy at a, almost in one of the top tier schools. It wasn't Ivy, but it was a top tier school.
Yeah.
And he didn't know shit about shit. And I couldn't believe it. And they talk about, well, Joe Biden is old. If I hear that old shit one more time, and I said to him, well, do you know how old Donald Trump is? He said, yeah, I think he's around 70. No, he's going to be 78. He's like, is he really? Yeah. Let me ask you a question. And then he asked another question that had to do with another Biden policy. For example, the reduction of healthcare expenses. No clue. He then started asking me about, I don't like what's going on at the border. Okay, I grant you that. But you do know that immigration has been an issue in this country for at least the last 60 years. So what makes it worse now than it was 4 years ago, or 8 years ago, or 50 years ago? No idea. So my question to you, because your generation consumes information very different than my generation.
Totally.
My generation, I couldn't wait for the morning when I heard something against the front door go boom. And that was generally the guy throwing the newspaper at the front door, right? Which used to piss my mom off. But, I'd go out, I'd get the newspaper, and while I'm eating my cereal, I would be reading the newspaper.
Yeah.
You guys don't read newspapers anymore.
Mm-mm.
Actually, many people don't read newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
They consume information differently. So if you were advising this campaign, Students for Biden, which 3 platforms would you be targeting in order to get this information out there?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I can't stress enough of the different information ecosystem now to even 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I co-host a podcast with Jill Wine-Banks, and one of the things we often talk about is during the Watergate era, there were only 3 major networks, and all of them pushed the same facts to the audience. But now we live in this very, very polarized media ecosystem where there are so many ways for people to, spread information unvetted. You look at Twitter, anyone can be verified, they can be fake, they can be real, you never know, but they can all spread information at the same rate. And what we know about social media, based off of some really interesting studies, is that lies travel faster. And that's sort of getting to your point about the narratives that young people are hearing about President Biden aren't the good news. And I'm very grateful for you and for MeidasTouch and for all of the people out there pushing the good news, because we need so much more of that against all of this misinformation, all of the negative news against President Biden. When I talk to my friends, the first narrative I hear of President Biden, like you said, is either he's too old, or did you see his latest trip or his latest gaffe? And when they talk about President Trump, they don't talk about how dangerous his indictments are, or any of the other crimes he's committing. They're talking about sort of the memes from his mugshot. They're making a joke of his latest statement, lashing out against AG Letitia James or any other prosecutor of his. And so I think a lot of the narratives are so warped because of social media. But that's why I think the Biden campaign really needs to get on these platforms quickly. We know the Biden campaign is on Truth Social now, which is interesting, but they're not yet on TikTok. I would say TikTok is number 1. You have to get on TikTok. Do more short form content on Instagram. I think that's going to be really important. And I think third is probably tied for me, YouTube and Reddit. There are a lot of people, at least where I'm at, and a lot of my friends who consume news through Reddit, these subreddit pages where it's specific subjects or, issue areas that they tune into on a daily basis. And that's how they receive their news. So I think YouTube and Reddit are also going to be major platforms in this election cycle. But at least sort of the people who I'm talking to, they aren't seeing enough of that. And I think, the Biden campaign really needs to get on those platforms, because otherwise, if you're just on New York Times or MSNBC or CNN or those traditional media networks, young people are not listening. They aren't watching those networks. And when you look at the demographics of those different networks, it's overwhelmingly above the age of 65 even. So it's something that young people aren't tuning into. They have really no appetite for that type of, media outlet. And so you have to meet young voters where they are. And I think, social media is going to be a key part of that. But I know for Students for Biden, a key part of that is also going to be meeting young people where they are on college campuses as well, sending surrogates to do listening sessions with young people. We're coming off the heels of Vice President Harris doing this really, I think, historic nationwide college tour. And when you looked at that, there were a lot of people at those events, and some of my friends who went there who didn't really feel passionate about Vice President Harris at first, or didn't really understand what this administration has accomplished. But after hearing and watching Vice President Harris engage with young people on the issues, they all basically said that, it was really meaningful to see a vice president show up in the way that Vice President Kamala Harris did. It was really meaningful to hear a politician actually spend the time and listen to us. And I think that's going to matter in this election.
Yeah. So since we were talking about the student loan forgiveness program, it sort of triggers in my mind, there's a problem with that. What about all the kids or the Gen Zers that don't go to college and live in rural areas? What's the plan, if there is even one, to get them behind President Biden?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really important question. I think there are a lot of programs, when you look at sort of what President Biden has passed, a lot of it is trying to empower those people who maybe don't have the traditional opportunities that, myself or most Gen Zers might have. And I think part of it is helping them either, I think there's a lot of educational programs right now that would give them the ability to go to, let's say, a trade school or some sort of specialized school to focus on the area that they're interested in. There's a lot of work right now happening around, helping small business owners and helping people start up small businesses. And I think that's at the essence, when we hear about this term Bidenomics being thrown around, a lot of people don't really understand what it means. But I think at its core, it's about empowering the people who have the fewest resources, the people who may not be able to access college or those opportunities that the privileged might be able to access. And that's at the centerpiece of this administration. And I think we're seeing it in policy after policy. This is a president who isn't just benefiting the richest among us or the most privileged among us. He's really trying to get to the people who are struggling, the people who may not have those who may not have the ability to access those opportunities. And whether it's through revitalizing our economy, making healthcare prices lower, or helping small businesses and giving them the funding they need to start that, sure. I think it's really important.
Yeah, well, let's not forget the uber rich that Donald Trump is courting. They make up what? 10,000, 50,000 people in the entire country versus small, everybody else. Each person, I don't care if you're a mega billionaire or if you don't have a dollar to your name, everyone's vote counts the same. That's the beauty of democracy. That's the beauty of America, right? Now, I want to just jump into this because I know a lot of young people have issues with the way that the Biden administration has handled the war in Gaza. I hear this shit all the time. And to me, it's infuriating. Some of these Gen Zers think that the United States has supported Israel over the people living and sadly dying in Gaza. Plus, there's now this entire new wave of anti-Semitism on campuses that exceeds anything that's been seen for at least the last, 60 plus years. What do you think this is all about? And how do you correct the record?
It's really tragic, first of all, when I have friends at, for instance, Cornell or Columbia right now who are really scared of even going out in public because of their identity and their Jewish identity. It's heartbreaking. And like you said, anti-Semitism is on the rise. Islamophobia is on the rise right now. Just a lot of it. Being a student on college campus right now, I think is very scary for those particular groups. But I think this issue in particular is getting a lot of sort of attention and for right reason. I think anyone looking at what's happening right now in Israel and in Gaza should be terrified, but there seems to be this sort of basic inability to separate out Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. I think we have to be very clear about that. They launched this October 7th attack on Israel that was totally unprovoked, that was totally unjustified. And then there's also this inability to separate out sort of Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli people. And I think, anyone who looks at what Netanyahu has done in response to the attacks, yes, they have a right to defend itself, but as you know, as a lawyer, you have to stay within the confines of international rules of law, and you can't commit really mass atrocities against just innocent civilians. But that's what it seems to be happening right now. But a lot of young people, when they see that, they're blaming President Biden for what's happening right now. And I think a lot of it is because we go back to social media and what are the narratives being amplified on places like TikTok or Instagram. There are things that are totally, I think, misrepresentative of what's actually happening right now. When you look at the record of what President Biden has done around this issue, I think it's been pretty solid. He's said Israel has a right to defend itself, which is true. They faced a terrorist attack, and any nation, I think, would respond against a terrorist attack. But two, he's been really forceful in getting Netanyahu to stay within the confines of the rules of war. He's really sort of negotiated behind the scenes. I think that's what doesn't really get enough attention on a place like TikTok, where there is very little nuance. There is very little sort of ability to explain these things that are happening behind the scenes. And instead, people are very quick to, I think, judge this president simply for supporting Israel and saying that, that's President Biden supporting mass atrocities, or that's President Biden committing genocide, when it couldn't be further from the truth. And I think the last thing that people often overlook is, when they talk about a ceasefire, President Biden was able to negotiate a ceasefire. There was an extended period of a pause within the war, but the first party to break that was Hamas. And so how do you deal with an organization that literally wants to kill Jewish people in Israel it's hard. And I don't think most people have an answer when you press them on that. So I think it's a very complicated issue, but not enough of that is getting sort of pushed out in a place like TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts for that matter.
Okay, but let me be clear about it.
Yeah.
You are absolutely correct. It is a complicated issue. It's an issue that it didn't start yesterday. It didn't start October 7th. It started a long time ago. But this, as you said, was an unprovoked attack. There are still hostages being kept. Yeah. We've seen videos of beheadings of children, rape, mass murder, right? Kidnapping, and so on. Despicable acts. And I think when you hear from some of the Gen Zers, I don't even care about that. Look at the number of people that are being killed in Gaza. They somehow missed the entire point. They missed the entire point here. My question to you is, you seem to be very well educated on this issue. Where did you get your information that distinguishes you from some of these other Gen Zers that I speak to that have no fucking clue, Victor? Zero about what took place on October 7th. They turn around and they claim that much of the video that has been put out there is not even legitimate. It's AI created. You really have to start to get concerned when Gen Zers are telling you that videos of paragliders landing in that area, the music festival, shooting people like it was a video game, beating young women, raping them, taking them as hostage, murdering babies, and they tell you that it's artificial intelligence that's been generated. What do you do? What can we possibly do to set the record straight? Because you're right. Joe Biden is not responsible for what happened. Hamas is. And Israel obviously has a right to defend itself within certain, confines. But they certainly have a right to defend themselves and to demand the return of the hostages.
Of hostages, right.
How do we get this message out? How do we get this message out?
It's such a hard task, because I think so many people have bought into whatever narrative that they believe in or whatever belief they believe in right now, where it's hard to change people's minds. But I will say, I think, I have to underscore something, and I talked to John Kirby about this on our podcast about sort of the challenges that he's facing. And one of the things that he said that really struck me was that the sort of importance of communication never ends. You can't just go on one platform and talk about this issue and expect people to hear about it or for people's minds to change. You have to talk about this constantly, and you have to get the facts out there. You have to get the facts out there about Hamas and the fact that they're a terrorist organization. You have to get the facts out there that Netanyahu does not represent all of the Israeli people, that Hamas doesn't represent all of Palestinians. And so I think that's the biggest challenge, is just being really consistent about the facts and understanding that you're probably not going to get everyone to change their minds. But I think there are a lot more reasonable voices out there. And some of the people that we're hearing from right now who are, on college campuses and who are the loudest on this issue also tend to be the people who aren't voting in the first place, or maybe who don't support President Biden in the first place. They just want to sow, I think, chaos in this election. And they just want to, I think, for better or for worse, I think they just, I don't know. They tend to be the very loud voices, but they aren't the ones who actually make a difference in elections. And I think that's what's going to be really important: finding the reasonable young people in our lives and talking to them in a reasonable way, getting the facts out there, getting what's happening out there to them. But I think really understanding that maybe those loudest voices on TikTok aren't so representative of most young people. When you look at polls, most young people actually support what President Biden has done around this issue. But when you listen to TikTok, or when you go to a college campus and you hear those loudest voices, you think that's representative of most young people, when I don't think it is. But I think we just have to be consistent with our messaging. We have to emphasize what's going on right now. And I think at the end of the day, that will prevail. That sort of narrative, most young people see that for what it is. and hopefully they will listen and understand it.
Okay, so Victor, let me switch gears for a second.
Yeah, sure.
To a more current event, because I know that you've been following the E. Jean Carroll case. What's your take on Trump's behavior in court and how Judge Lewis Kaplan has handled him so far from the perspective of a young person?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think Donald Trump is doing exactly what he wanted to get out of this entire proceeding, which is, I mean, you know Donald Trump better than anyone else, but I think he's trying to make this into a show. I mean, he's trying to make himself as a victim here. This is the entire point of, him wanting to be at court because he can create drama, he can sow chaos. And one of the exchanges that we saw between Judge Kaplan and Donald Trump was, at one point he was murmuring under his breath so loudly that in fact, I think the jurors could hear, the plaintiff's table could hear, and so they made
everybody could comment about it. The whole courtroom
everyone could hear. Right, exactly. And so Judge Kaplan said to Donald Trump, you should tone down your voice, otherwise you will be kicked out. And then Donald Trump said something along the lines of, well, you would really want that, or I would really want that.
And then he said, I'd like to see you do it.
Right, exactly. So he's testing, I think, the limits of this court. But Judge Kaplan, I think, has been one of the best judges in terms of keeping Donald Trump and Alina Habba under control. And we saw the same with Alina Habba, his lawyer, when she would try to, cross-examine E. Jean Carroll, or when she would try to raise objections. And Judge Kaplan stepped in really forceful ways to control her. And I think there's this sort of, one of the things that we're seeing, I think, in these court proceedings is when Donald Trump is present, there seems to be a difference in terms of how his lawyers act. And I'm wondering, Michael, do you see this as well? Sort of the effect of what Donald, as a client, what lawyers will do to serve their client when they're actually there. And I just wonder sort of what would have happened if Donald Trump wasn't there. Would Alina Habba have acted differently? Would this have been different?
Well,
but I think so much.
So let me answer that question really briefly. Alina Habba has limited to no trial experience. So whether Donald was in the courtroom or not, she doesn't even understand the very basics of the introduction of evidence into the record. She just doesn't understand it. So it made no difference if Donald was there or not there. But you are right. The things that they say, the performance that they give is not to the court. It's not to the jury if it's a jury trial. It is to one person, their client, so that their client knows that they are fighting for him. Even though they're making assholes out of themselves, it doesn't make a difference. I saw Chris Kise do that. Chris Kise is actually, or was, I should say, a respected attorney. He was. Yeah. But his behavior at the New York Attorney General case, the civil fraud case that's going on, was beyond despicable. And only because Judge Engoron is a much more patient judge, he is a much more forgiving judge than Lewis Kaplan is. He allowed Alina Habba to do to me the things that she was trying to do to E. Jean Carroll. But Judge Kaplan was not going to have any of it. Yeah. Zero. Now, maybe the difference is because, Engoron, realized, one, I could handle myself, and two, it's not a jury trial. It was a bench trial because Habba failed to check the box for a jury. Right. Maybe he was going to give her more latitude in that. Right, wrong, indifferent, makes no difference. She has no idea what she's doing. And, there's an expression, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, baffle them with your bullshit. And that's exactly what Alina Habba is all about. She doesn't need to be smart because she's pretty. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, I mean, it's such an interesting point. And going back to, I would just say one thing that really struck me throughout the hearing, and for anyone who's read sort of the exchanges, it's just so gut-wrenching on every level to hear about what E. Jean Carroll has had to go through. This is someone who didn't want this thrust upon her whatsoever, but Donald Trump made it an effort to smear E. Jean Carroll. And when you listen to sort of she was once just a revered writer. She was a writer. She was someone who wanted to just live a normal life, but she couldn't live a normal life. And it reminds me so much of Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss. They were people who just were ordinary people. They didn't want this to happen to them, but because of Republicans and far-right extremists and Donald Trump, the reality is totally different. And I think at the end of the day, the question in this case, and so many people much smarter than I am, people who have law degrees have said, at the end of the day, it's what will it take for Donald Trump to learn a lesson? How much money will it take for Donald Trump to actually stop smearing people, to actually stop attacking people for no reason? And I hope the jury makes the right call here. You know what I think Rudy Giuliani was forced to pay, I think was a good amount, and I hope Donald Trump has to pay just as much, or
Rudy
even more.
Hasn't been able to pay it because but Rudy hasn't been able to pay. In fact, he's filed for bankruptcy, which Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, as counsel, brought a motion to the court claiming that the only reason that he filed that bankruptcy is in order to do what's called debtor creditor possession protection. We'll see what happens with Rudy Colludi, drunken Giuliani, but very different than Donald because, Rudy doesn't have the money to pay. Donald does. But it's not only that Donald has that money to pay. Donald has the ability to raise the money to pay. He can easily put out another 50, 60, posts, asking, "Hey, Patriot, they did it to me again. They're trying to bankrupt me. I need, I'm doing this for you. Support me with, $10, $15, $20, $50, whatever it might be." That's what Donald is all about. He is the greatest grifter in chief that this country has ever seen. But, if I can, because you brought up the whole issue at the very beginning of this conversation regarding immigration as one of the topics that Gen Zers are concerned about. I want to really be clear about this. Republicans don't want the immigration issue fixed because it's good for them politically. Not good for the country, not good for the world, but it's good for the Republican Party. At least that's what they think. So how do you think that the Biden administration should handle the border? And what do we do to get Gen Zers involved? You see, I think that the more that the Gen Zers are involved, people like yourself, you relate better to another Gen Z than I do. And if you're out there somehow talking about it, arguing the fact that Republicans don't want this immigration issue fixed, there's a better likely chance that a Gen Zer will listen to you than certainly listen to me. And a much better chance that they'll listen to me, I think, than they'll even listen to the president.
No, it's right. And studies have shown that actually the most effective messengers to reach Gen Zers aren't politicians, aren't people who are older than them, it's their peers. And so to get to young people, to actually persuade them on a particular issue, you have to find trusted messengers. And those trusted messengers aren't the people who are on, MSNBC or the people who are commentating. They aren't Joe Biden. They aren't Karine Jean-Pierre. They're people who are directly in that young person's life, or they're people who young people can relate to. And it's much easier, again, like you said, to relate to someone who is of your age and to relate to someone who is much older than you, or to relate to someone who is a politician who might be distanced from your life. And so I think, yes, we have to get young people out there spreading that message. And to that point about the message, it's actually a really simple message that I am very shocked that mainstream media has not given it the attention it deserves, which is Republicans have point blank said that they do not want to solve this issue of immigration because President Biden is in office. They want to deal him a blow. They want to make this into a political wedge issue in 2024. They've said it out loud. Speaker Mike Johnson, who, quote unquote, cares so much about immigration, said over the weekend after there was a bipartisan bill in the Senate that he wouldn't support it at all. That tells you, I think, everything you need to know about sort of the moment that we're living in right now, where there are some faithful, I think, Republicans in the Senate trying to make this happen because they understand what a big issue this is. But you have then House Republicans who are totally willing to slash all of that just because they want to deal a loss to President Biden. I think it's very important for all of us who are in this sort of, messaging space to make that as clear as possible. This is not on Democrats. This is not on President Biden. This is on House Republicans and Speaker Mike Johnson, who are willing to sabotage our country for politics. And, I was reading the New York Times this morning, and they have a headline out there that's trying to suggest that this is because of President Biden, that, this is President Biden's making, that this is going to ruin President Biden's foreign policy agenda, without mentioning the fact that Republicans are the ones who are trying to sabotage this deal. And I think we have to be very clear-eyed about that, because that's again, that's the choice that faces us into this election. Republicans want you to believe that they care about these issues. They're going around the country touting the Inflation Reduction Act. They're going around the country touting the Infrastructure Act when not a single one of them voted for it. And I think it's really shameful. And we have to be very clear that, I'm glad President Biden is calling them out, but it has to be more than President Biden calling them out. It has to be the media. It has to be all of us, whether on our respective platforms. I'm grateful that you do it on your podcast basically every week. We have to be very clear about the real threat right now, which is House Republicans and their willingness to just play politics with every issue that we care about.
So let me ask you this, because I know a lot of Gen Zers because of my daughter and my son.
Yeah.
And for a while there, I had been hearing from a lot of them, and some actually even did this. They moved to Texas. And I asked them, why? Why are you moving to Texas? And their response to me, Texas has a great buzz, whether it's Dallas or Austin. Texas has this sort of great buzz about it. But then you turn around and you look, and then you have Greg Abbott as your governor. Could possibly be the absolute fucking worst governor in the entire union. This fucking jerk off supports all the wrong things as far as I'm concerned. Pregnant women are dying. Immigrants are dying. They're drowning in the Rio Grande. Does anyone still that around your generation, do you think that Texas is cool?
It's becoming much harder, I think, for a lot of young people who, let's say they moved to Texas a couple of years ago, to actually support what's happening in a state like Texas or Florida, for that matter, when their entire agenda seems to be waging a war on young people. You look at, like you said, the immigration situation that they're doing right now is terrible. Reproductive rights are under assault in southern states, but it's also basic things like voting rights. You look at what's happening in a state like Texas. There's right now a bill that's pending the state legislature, but if passed, we know that Greg Abbott would sign it, which is that they want to ban all polling locations from college campuses. They don't want any college campus to have a single polling location, because I think they're really scared of young people. They're really scared of the threat that we pose to their ability to stay in power. And so their tactic isn't to meet us where we are. Their tactic isn't to listen to us. It isn't to understand the issues we care about. It's to suppress our voices. And I think for a lot of young people, we're seeing right through that, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of organizers right now in Texas really trying to combat those voter suppression laws. But you also, unfortunately, have a lot of people who have moved to Texas in recent years who are, I think, starting to question that. When you're starting to look around, you see books being banned, you see education coming under assault, you see reproductive rights coming under assault. It's not a state that most people, I think, want to live in. And I think it goes beyond just young people. It's parents of young people when they send their kids off to schools and they see that their kid can't read Toni Morrison, or they see that their kid can't talk about.
Don't worry about it. He doesn't need to read. He's carrying a gun.
Right, exactly. They allow people to carry a gun, but they don't allow people to vote. That's how perverse it is right now in those southern states. But I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that. You look at what happened in Tennessee recently when the Tennessee Three stood up. There was a massive there was a massive movement that rose up in support of the two legislators who got fired simply for advocating for gun violence reform. And I think most people are fed up with that, and most people just want to change that. And I think that's going to be a really big animating factor in 2024 is a response to all of the sort of nonsense that Republicans are imposing on young people.
Yeah, Greg Abbott's got some real problems when his belief system is it's okay for you at the age of 18 to buy a firearm, but you can't go to the store and buy a beer. That's got that's really got to turn around and piss young people off. So let me just move on for a second and ask you, because we did talk a little bit about President Biden, but you know who we didn't talk about? We didn't talk about Kamala Harris. Has Kamala caught fire with your generation at all? Because we know, at least my generation, I believe she's highly effective. But the press doesn't feature her enough. What's your take on her popularity? And do you think that she might be, president material someday?
Short answer on your question about whether or not she's effective. Absolutely. She is. But like you said, she does not get enough attention of that. I suspect it might be because of her race. I suspect it might be because of her gender and her being the first Black woman as vice president of the United States. But I think she deserves more credit for that. When you listen to her speeches, when you look at her interviews, she was just on The View this week, and she fielded questions from a bunch of people on that show. It's not a really easy crowd on that show, but she did it so effectively. She did it so brilliantly, but she doesn't really get enough attention for it. And I wish she did, because she is such a talented communicator. And we talked about this nationwide college tour that she did, and all you have to look at are the lines that waited for her. The lines stretched around the block to wait for her. And then when they got into the arena, the level of energy and the level of enthusiasm for young people to see someone who looks like them. You talk about someone who, representation, and you talk about the importance of representation. Well, Vice President Harris is exactly what we want to see in government. Someone who is a trailblazer, someone who is the first of her kind, someone who doesn't look like most vice presidents in American history, which have been white men, and I think that's refreshing for a lot of young people to see that sort of representation. And I think, the first couple of years of the vice presidency were a bit challenging for Kamala Harris. She took on issues that I think were, frankly, a bit out of her purview, and I think hard for any politician to handle. But she's really stepped into, I think, her ground game, which is abortion rights, which is a big issue that young people care about, like we've said. And she's also leaning into some of those culture war issues that Republicans are waging. Right after Ron DeSantis somehow justified slavery as having a personal benefit to Black people during that time, she went to Florida, and she was the first to respond to Ron DeSantis. And I think that really is important. And then she's also taking on voting rights as a really key issue. She's done a bunch of voting rights roundtables and listening sessions with activists in that space. And I think that really matters. So young people, I think, do really find Vice President Harris as an effective communicator. They see someone who looks like them in the spaces that we occupy. And I think that's really important. And I hope she gets out there more often. I know she's embarking on a reproductive rights tour starting in Wisconsin, I think, next week. So I think she's really hitting the ground running. But we need to see more of, I think, people like Kamala Harris being those messengers for this administration, because I think young people will listen to Kamala Harris far more than they'll listen to someone like Joe Biden. And we need to get her out there far more than she is right now, at least.
Yeah, look, I'm a fan of Kamala's, and I also don't think that she gets out enough, and I don't think the press, covers her, properly. The only problem that Kamala actually has, the way I see it, is that she's a female and that she's Black. And I would hope that Gen Zers, who are much more tolerant than Gen X or the baby boomers and so on, my hope is that this would incentivize them to get angry, to get mad. And the only way to fight back is with the vote, because your vote is equal to Donald Trump's vote. Your vote is equal to any of the other, 1%ers that are, old white men. So I'm with you on that. And I don't think she gets the proper credit that she deserves. But Victor, the hour here on Mea Culpa goes by very, very quick. I have one last question that I just want to throw out there. When you look at what's going on at a time when so many people don't know truth from fiction, or as my generation likes to say, you ask from your elbow, and the right is under the spell or group psychosis, do you imagine that your generation will be able to bridge that divide?
I do, and I have a lot of optimism for this generation, because I think for as much of the nonsense and chaos that we're seeing on some issues, I think for the most part, young people are very pragmatic. Young people are very savvy with social media, and they're able to, I think, cut through the noise and really see BS when it's out there, and I think see right through the noise. And so I'm optimistic that young people will be the ones who save us. But I want to get to something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is, I think this election, more than ever before, it's going to be the little things that matter so much more than I think past elections. It's great that we get to have this conversation. It's great that, people get to go on MSNBC and have a large audience. But I think what's going to be so important this election are just ordinary people who are living their lives, doing ordinary things, and helping sustain our democracy. And so I think if you're anyone listening out there right now, if you know a young person in your life, talk to them. Be that trusted messenger in their life. Talk to them about the issues that they care about. Register someone to vote. Send a postcard to someone on a college campus. Be the one that, reaches Gen Zers, because that's, I think, what's going to matter far more than, any conversation that happens on any social media platform, on any cable network. It's going to be those little things that matter every day. And I know a lot of young people, at least who I talk to, when you have those conversations on a one-on-one level, young people really listen. I had someone come up to me the other day who wondered, what the heck has President Biden ever accomplished? And, we had a conversation. I walked her through all of the things that President Biden has accomplished. And by the end of that conversation, she felt a lot better about the state of our country. And she felt a lot better about this administration and said she would vote for Joe Biden. But I think those little conversations matter so much, just as much as what happens out there on social media. So,
but Vic, hold on, whoa, time out on that one, because that goes back to a question about 7 or 8 questions ago when I turned around and I said to you, how is it possible this young lady that you were speaking to that didn't know a single accomplishment that Joe Biden had made over the last 3 years? What school is she in? Is she in college?
She's with me at UCLA. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You're talking about a fine institution. All right. You're not talking about Trump University here. How is it possible that she could wake up on any given day, turn on a television, unless, your generation really doesn't watch the news. They don't watch television. They really watch Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Apple, whatever. How is it possible, though, with everything that's been going on, the chaos in the world, that she could be so out of touch? It's the way I felt when I was talking to that young man. Completely devoid of any facts whatsoever. So is the answer TikTok? Because if the answer is TikTok, I will call the White House right fucking now and say, Joe has to take his shirt off on TikTok and do something in order to get somebody's attention. The fact that a UCLA college student could not name a single Biden accomplishment, that I find it's devastating. I find it just incredible and sad all at the same time.
It is devastating and sad all at the same time. And I think part of it is just people really aren't paying attention. They aren't looking at this. I think a lot of people in DC, they tend to be wrapped, I think, around, they think what they're doing is the most important. They think that everyone's paying attention to what they're doing. And that's just simply not the case. And I think, yes, TikTok is part of the answer, but so is, all of us having, like I said, those small conversations, understanding, why don't people understand the facts? What are the places where people are consuming their information, and understanding the role that all of us have as trusted messengers with young people in our lives to spread those facts. And as frustrating, I think, as it is, just have that conversation. I think you'll find that a lot of young people, once they hear those facts, they become much more aware. But I wish it wasn't the case. I wish you had many more young people who knew what this administration has accomplished, but unfortunately they don't. And I think the only solution to this is, yes, get to the places where young people are and have conversations with young people, and really get them to understand the facts. And I think once they do, we'll see something shift. But I hope the campaign is listening. I hope the campaign will get on those platforms much quicker and much more aggressive than they are right now.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, Vic, study hard, do well, my friend. Keep talking to these individuals. Look forward to seeing you again very soon. And the next time I'm in LA, I'm coming to see you there at UCLA. Yes. All right.
Sounds good. And next time I'm in New York, I'll see you.
Thanks so much. Bye now.